want to talk to you about in this particular vlog is really based on something that's happened very recently over there in South Africa, which has had a serious impact on a very, very well-established leader in South Africa in business. Mark Lamberti was very recently appointed to the board of Eskom to assist in the whole process of cleaning out the corruption and making Eskom work, for want of a better word, and be effective in delivering the utilities and services that were required. Along with obviously carrying on with doing his current job at Imperial Holdings as the CEO. Now basically it's been all over the media, so people in South Africa will obviously know what I'm about to talk about now. But it's really for the benefit of those people that don't know South Africa and don't know Mark and don't know the situation that I'm going to really talk this one through. And I'm going to talk it through because it's another. Some people might think this is a moral victory from the far left, thinking, well, this is wonderful, and even probably some people from the far right might regard it as a moral victory as well. I don't know. All I see is a total lack in understanding of people and their position and what they stand for and what they're responsible for, and all the years and years and years of hard work and dedication that they've gone into trying to make life better for all South Africans in all walks of life across society, to be put into a position where this happens. You know, and people even in the legal profession are misconstrued the whole point of what was said, and really I just think it's shocking. Anyway, just have a look at this quick television presentation, and then I will go into a little bit more detail in terms of my views on this.
Hi, good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us here on ANN7 Prime with me, Cindy Mabi. And this is our top story for this half hour. The plight of women in the workplace has taken center stage again after Eskom board member Mark Lamberti was found guilty of impairing a black woman's dignity. The Black Business Council is calling for Lamberti's removal from Eskom, while Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan is seeking legal advice on the matter. Gordhan's action follows the court judgment against the Imperial Group CEO. Lamberti was found guilty of discrimination for impairing the dignity of a black woman after he called her an employment equity appointment. Lamberti has since apologized unreservedly, but that hasn't stopped the growing calls for his axing. Meanwhile, the Lamberti case exposes the challenges women face in the workplace.
The Black Business Council supports the calls for Mark Lamberti to resign, to do the honorable thing and resign from both Imperial and Eskom, because you cannot have a situation where someone who does not buy into gender equity and equality sitting at Eskom and sitting at Imperial, because how is he going to push transformation wherever he's sitting? If you look at the corporates, the corporate sector, the way it is, we're in 24 years after democracy, but we still have more than 80% of the CEOs being white. Even the people who get hired, if you look at the rate of unemployment for black people, is extremely high, which means people are still hiring people who look like them. People are still promoting people who look like them. So hence we're calling for the total transformation of the economy. People who run, controls and manage this economy should reflect the demographics of the country.
The most important thing to remember, among other things, is that the appointment of board members and the removal thereof is done by the Department of Energy, which is Department of Public Enterprises. So in this regard, Minister Pravin Gordhan will be the minister responsible. So what we have noted is that yesterday the department issued a statement essentially saying that they are seeking legal advice, and in due course they will make a pronouncement as to what's going to happen to Mr. Lamberti. From our end, there's not much we can do because this is a matter which is being dealt with by the shareholder.
Yes, Kosatu, we do support and welcome the fact that women are starting to speak out more. But we are not shocked really about the ESCOM matter that involves Lamberti, because what people have not really acknowledged or realized is that ours still remains apartheid capitalism. What we did after 1994 was not to change anything, was not to transform anything, but was to say a system that was historically racist and very patriarchal in nature. What we did was to say, let the system co-opt us. Now, what the system did, it co-opted men, and many of those men, as soon as they got there, they did not really touch the system. And they still predominantly remain decision makers in most of the workplaces. So you have a situation where now there's a collusion between white and black males to really keep the system as is. That is why you will look at the labor market dynamic survey that shows that women actually earn 23% less than men.
The lines are open to you on 011-542-1046, 011-542-1046, and we can engage on this matter, the challenges women face in the workspace around discrimination, sexism, and even racism, and being sidelined for promotion or even being the subjects of derogatory comments.
I worked for Mark Lamberti in the 80s and in the 90s. I worked for him and I worked with him. I worked indirectly for him, and I worked directly for him, for want of a better word, as a director in the company as well as a general manager. And I can honestly say he was, having lived and worked in South Africa for a good 8 years before I worked for Mark Lamberti, I've got to say he was a breath of fresh air as a leader and as an individual, in terms of his whole view on life and leadership and business and understanding of the South African situation at that particular point in time even. He taught me such a great deal of understanding of humanity and of how people think in the workplace, and made me think about myself to such a degree. And look, no one gets it right 100% all the time, but he added such an influence to my life, as I know he did to thousands and thousands of other people, black and white, across South Africa. I just say, with Mark having now resigned from ESCOM, it is such a loss. It's a tragic loss to ESCOM, the people of ESCOM and the people of South Africa, quite honestly. It is just tragic. And there are very few Mark Lambertis around in the world, never mind about in South Africa. And when you start losing leaders of this caliber, who have this set of human values as very much part of their core, to lose people like that is just going to be detrimental to people in South Africa, to black people in South Africa. Because, and that's my own thinking. I mean, this whole issue and incident that happened in Imperial several years ago, with this accountant, is it's a sort of it's an everyday occurrence that goes on in meetings, in boardrooms. Now I know Mark has apologised for what he said, because he didn't, and what he has said is it wasn't in any way racial or discriminating in that respect, and he's just apologising for the fact that it had an effect on her, on the lady concerned, and but I mean, being a director in an establishment, any large establishment, is tough sometimes. It is tough, and if you get on the wrong end of discussions, sometimes things happen. Things are said. Lots of people walk out of meetings with the wrong kind of feelings sometimes. Sometimes you take things on board a little bit personally, and you step away, and then you realise, no, I was told something that I had to have told to me because it was important. I got that message across. It goes in and it comes out here, and you learn to go with it. That's part of what leadership is all about, and I think it's just tragic that it should come to a case where it's gone to the high courts, and the courts have even found it prudent enough to make the decision they have, and then to take it where it seems to be going further and further and further, demanding Mark's head now in every role he has is, well, I just think it's the country is going to lose, and therefore the people are going to lose, the workforce is going to lose, because it's people like that are quite honestly contributing to society at a very high level, and I just think it's shocking. And I do realise South Africa's got a different set of circumstances to the rest of the world in many respects, and there are things that have to be put right over this time frame. But Mark is one of the few people that understands that. Here's a recent interview. It's about half an hour long, so I want to that Mark made on the Money web program on his life, and I think it's important for everyone. Lots of people in business, know Mark will have seen this, no doubt, and will I don't have to see it, but this is really for the benefit of those people that don't know Mark Lamberti. Here's a little short half-hour clip that's going to really tell you about the man and what he's all about.
Well, I think the definition of leadership is in the word. To lead is not to maintain the status quo. And it doesn't apply just to organizational hierarchy. One can be a thought leader. And so for me, a leader is someone who assesses where we are today and decides on a better place to be tomorrow, and then takes people with him, either intellectually or as a group of followers. I guess the test is, no matter where you put yourself on the organizational hierarchy, no matter what you call yourself, unless you have willing followers, you're not a leader. Well, I think it was Plato who said to us, know thyself. And I think that's the foundation of leadership. One cannot be an inauthentic leader. And so to follow someone else's path, or to be something that you are not, will soon be exposed. I think then that what happened to me was a kind of a flash in my younger years when I happened to be at university doing a BSc and realized that I was doing what my father wanted me to do, not what I necessarily wanted to do. And I came to the conclusion, which sounds selfish if you say it harshly, and that is that it's my life. It's not my father's life. It's not going to be my wife's life or my children's life even. It's my life. And that is not a selfish statement. It's an assumption of responsibility and accountability. And so I think that that's the first step on a leadership journey, is to say that I am responsible for my life. Obviously, there's always good luck. There's always circumstances that come along that change your life. And so I think it's arrogant to deny that. But at the same time, one has to say the journey is actually about discovering who I am, and living life is how you do that. Leading without that, I think, can be facile. I think that people soon see through if you are Joe blogs today and Peter tomorrow, and you have to be yourself. From my earliest days, there'd been music in my home. I had a great uncle who used to play the classics, and so I could hum Mozart and Beethoven when I was 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. And with that, there'd been a piano in our house, and my mother was a reasonable pianist, but I taught myself to play by ear, and that led to an interest in music. And I then went off and started to play in a rock band for 4 years. That in itself was an extraordinarily deep leadership learning, because there's no hierarchy in a band. One leads on the basis of true influence, and I was also the weakest musician in that band. So to try and lead a group of creative people who are all better than you in their craft is a real leadership challenge, and I learned a great deal from that. When you're leading through influence, you're bringing people around to a way of thinking. You're convincing them that what needs to be done is for the sake of the better good. But also, there's a great amount of teamwork in a band. It's not random. It's not do your own kind of thing, because to play in a band that plays tight music, everybody's got to do exactly the same thing at precisely the correct half second. So that kind of leadership around precision and around a quest for excellence has maybe, I think, contributed to a quality that I have today, which I call divine dissatisfaction, which is being pleased but never satisfied. There's a constant quest for trying to do it better. While in the band, I met and married Annette in 3 months. And that was, of course, a life-changing experience, which was 37 years ago. We've been together since then. And realized and knew at the time that being a musician in a band was not a sustainable job if you were a married person. And so I left the band to join my father, who had, together with his brother, established shopping centers in northern Natal. And we had 2 stores selling hi-fi equipment, TVs, home electronics. And that was a great experience, but it was there in that situation that 2 things happened. The first was that I fell in love with retail, and secondly, I realized that running a small business would not keep me occupied for too long. And decided that if I wanted to run a big business, the best way I could learn about that was to work for a big business. And so I left the family business and went and joined Bradlow's Ladysmith, earning 650 Rand a month as a store manager. Lived out of capital for about 4 years, but grew through the organization to the point where I was handling everything in Bradlow's other than finance. And that was the start of a retail career. My move to Wooltrue was a consequence of delivering a talk to the Human Resource Institute. Unbeknown to me, the human resource manager of Wooltrue was in the audience, and at the time I had moved into a public company called Jazz Stores, and we were doing some pretty interesting things regarding the relationships with labor, organized labor, and our staff. And I spoke about those things, and the human resource manager from Wooltrue asked me if I was interested in joining the group, and the first discussion was around moving to Cape Town to run Truworths. As strange as it may seem, even with Annette having come from Cape Town, we didn't want to go and live in Cape Town. So we declined that, and a few years later they came back and said, no, well, we've got this thing in Johannesburg where we've got 6 macro stores. Would that interest you? At the time, those stores were losing money, fairly dilapidated, and I looked at them and took the position on the basis that I could write the strategy and that my compensation would lean towards equity. Part of my growth as a leader was to try and formulate some philosophies. I've tended throughout my career to be quite slow at the front end of doing anything, but making up the time in the latter end. But I spend a lot of time at the front end thinking things through. And at that time, I'd already started to observe many leaders in business. I developed some principles that were tied to our family values and the kind of Catholic ethic that I'd grown up with, and then formulated a management credo on the basis that those were the principles that I would like to govern the way I ran a business whenever I did. I had a view that I would be running a big business one day, and I thought those would be good guidelines to help me do that. My management credo has become, I wouldn't say a public document, but certainly something that I've shared with everyone I've ever worked with. Because one can't set up a set of principles and expect to adhere to them perfectly. And so for me, the biggest test is to say to the people I work with, this is my credo, and if I fail, let me know. But it also establishes a rapport with people of similar values. Perhaps one of the most important and the starting of those management credo points was around people, where I say that people are not merely a consumable means to a corporate end, they are an end in themselves. And in that vein, each individual is unique, and we therefore have to deal with each individual in our business, with deference to their uniqueness. And I think that's guided a lot of what I do. I think that leaders adapt to the people that work with them. They don't expect the people that work with and for them to adapt to them. There were other issues in there about the importance of shareholders in a capitalistic organization, and others around delivering things like trust and contribution in an organization. I believe that I don't have to like you to work very effectively with you for many, many years, but I absolutely have to trust you. I think the issue of productivity, for example, we are always, it's our job each and every day to try and make a business more efficient. That's what we do. That's the entry ticket to the game. And if this whole process of continuous improvement is neglected for a second, you get behind the curve. So that kind of thing as well. When Wooltree invited me to look at these 6 macro stores, I investigated the opportunity and decided to take it on. And within a short while, it took roughly a year, I had written a strategy for what I believed would be Massmart, recognizing that those 6 stores on their own were not going to be large enough to compete with the major retailers of the country, and that we would have to go on somewhat of an acquisition strategy, and therefore did one of our first acquisitions and called what then became Massmart. That was the start of the journey, acquiring businesses, integrating them based on the capabilities that existed in in Macro. All the time, of course, the 3,000 employees growing to 5,000 to 10,000 and so on, and working with people to try and bring the best out of this business. One of the interesting things that we did along the way was that I recognized that it was much easier to find somebody with leadership and teach them about shopkeeping. Much easier to do that than to find a compliant shopkeeper and teach them about leadership. And so I looked for the leaders in the union movement, and I started to look at shop stewards and people like that who exhibited leadership, and then bring them into management, not to try and coerce them, but because they were the best and the latent leaders. And so this constant theme of developing leaders came along, so much so that if I fast forward to today, I think I really only have 2 jobs, and that is to choose the strategy for the organization and define the strategy, even that's with people, but to make sure that we're comfortable with it, and then to choose the people. So I think that if a top leader of an organization such as Imperial is able to do those 2 things, just about everything else looks after itself. Part of that growth from Macro through the acquisitions was to start to have a personal philosophy that I could be tested against. And that's when I formulated my management credo, which essentially was coming to a conclusion of what my life is. Being appointed managing director of Macro and formulating the strategy for the growth of what was to become Massmart put us on a path of acquiring businesses, sometimes different businesses, and then having to integrate people into the businesses. This meant that we had to put forward a fairly consistent strategy and set of values. And in that vein, I formulated my own personal mission. The notion of mission is not always understood. I've often heard people say that a company's mission must be a one-liner that everybody in the whole organization understands. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that mission needs to be a fairly comprehensive statement against which you can test your behavior. As a company, a mission is it's a description of the capabilities and competencies required to achieve your vision. But on a personal basis, a mission is not a statement of what I want to have or what I want to do. A mission is a statement of who I want to be. And I think in the quiet hours, in an unstressed way, if any individual can write down a mission, and I must stress you should write it down so that it's open to scrutiny and open to critique and open to testing, it can be a wonderful determinant of how you behave. These days we have the law as one of the governing factors of our behavior, and then we all have some kind of a set of ethics, which is, I would say, comes before the law. But a mission statement is even more noble than that. It's saying, who do I want to be? And in that mission statement, the most telling point for me was that life is a journey of discovering who I am, and I know that greed, emotion, and fatigue will damage my judgment in that journey, and what will enhance it is keeping an open mind and seeking the counsel of others. So there were many other points in the mission around love as being a keystone of life, around the humility that comes with travel and knowledge, and so on and so on. The business schools and our formal education tell us that the purpose of business is to create shareholder value. I think that's glib. I think the purpose of business is to survive. These days, I'm told that the average lifespan of a business is something below 30 years. So we haven't even got to the point where businesses live as long as we do. And how do businesses survive? They survive by dealing with the reasonable demands or requests of all of their stakeholders. If you don't look after your customers, you don't have a business. If you don't look after your staff, you don't have a business. If you don't look after the government and pay your taxes, you don't have a business. And so for me, this notion of looking after all stakeholders and understanding their needs is central to the task of running a business. In recent times, this has evolved into the concept of sustainability. And so for me, sustainability is as much about making sure that we've got the right people working in our organization who are motivated and focused, as it is about making sure that we don't damage the planet. Most people come to work every day with 40% energy levels, and most companies have knocked that down to 20% by lunchtime. And my view is that if we can turn that up to 60% by lunchtime through good leadership, by creating environments where people want to give their best and release their energy, then we're 3 times better off than our competitors. So, you just keep coming back to it. It's about the people, either the people as customers, the people as stakeholders in the community, and very importantly, the people as our employees. And today, this is the way most, I think, enlightened leaders think about businesses. You can't just bang the table and expect businesses to perform. And moreover, financial performance is always a lagging indicator. If, as a leader, all you're doing is looking at the bottom line on your accounts every month, it's too late. One has to look behind the financial numbers to the operating performance that created them, and look behind that operating performance to the human performance that created that. And that's normally where your starting point should be. I've had many businesses that have not been doing well at all, but I sleep easy at night because I know the people in those businesses are doing the right things, and it's just a matter of time before the business comes right. Conversely, I've had businesses with a wonderful bottom line, and I'm not at all comfortable because I know that the people are not doing the right things, and it's only a matter of time before the business fails. So, we will always come back to saying, understand the people, understand their differences, understand their potential. And the easiest thing on earth for a manager to manage is performance. It's very easy for me to tell anybody what they did yesterday or for them to know what they did yesterday. What's probably one of the most difficult things in a business to assess is potential. How do we know that a certain individual operating at this level has the potential, with some intervention, some experience, some education, some help, how do we know that they can get to that level? And the assessment of potential is essential for any growing business. We don't just employ people from 9 to 5. When they come into the office or the workplace, we employ the whole person. We employ them with their shaky marriage, with their aging parents, with their ADD child. And to the extent that we as employers know nothing about those things, we can never achieve alignment. My view is that any relationship will naturally diverge unless you work on it. And yet we claim to have relationships with our employees, and we know nothing about them. So one of the things that I formulated with the help of a leader that I worked with many years ago was a thing called a covenant discussion, where we try and find alignment between the employee and the company. And this is not a performance appraisal of any sort. This is simply saying, what are the things that matter in your life? Where would you like to be in 3 or 4 years' time? And is this company the place where you might be able to achieve that? At the same time, in that conversation, I would say this is where we believe the company is going to go. And is that a compelling vision for you to follow? And so by seeking that alignment, one has discussions with people which enable you to understand where they're at and what they bring to the workplace. And it also helps to have you understand some of the issues that are going through their lives and be, if you like, empathetic about that. I would far rather have somebody come to work on a Thursday morning pleased with himself because he watched his son play soccer on Wednesday afternoon than have somebody come to work on a Thursday morning desperately unhappy because he didn't. So, it leads you into those kinds of flexibilities around the whole person rather than just thinking, going back to where I started, that people are much, much more than a consumable means to a corporate end. I think the tone at the top is everything. And so if I could achieve that sort of alignment with the people who work directly with me and with the people who report directly to them, I think we have probably had an impact on the company. It's unrealistic to think that you could engage in a conversation like that, which probably takes an hour and a half or 2 hours, with more than 40 or 50 people. So there are practicalities to it, but I think the way those conversations get people thinking about themselves and thinking about their relationship with the company sets a tone. The essence of a leadership journey is the humility to recognize that you can always learn something. So the question then becomes how. Now, there are numerous interventions. It could be an assignment to a bigger job. It could be sending somebody to a university for a program. It could be the right kind of conversation with one's boss. It could be a mentor or a coach. So there's not one size fits all. But I think recognizing what that person's journey is and what the specific intervention is required, I think is what it's mainly about. My experience has been that the minute individuals' learning curve starts to flatten, that's the time to give them a bigger challenge. Because if leadership is about the S curve, if it's about saying, this is where we are, now let's take the business to there, when you get to there has to be another S curve. And therefore, I think the most effective way of developing people, and especially the most effective way of developing, let's call it executives, people who have got the education behind them, is to give them increasingly more complex and challenging tasks to take on and positions to hold. The issue of growth is often about discomfort, and so that which hurts instructs. So sometimes we need to put people in, out of their comfort zone in order for them to grow. My exposure to business leaders around the world suggests to me that we have very, very similar problems, and very, very similar challenges, and require very, very similar approaches. Cultures are different everywhere, but most of what makes a business run well is similar. But that's not the case for us in South Africa. We have two massive obligations here, which every businessman has to take account of. The first, of course, is the apartheid legacy and our obligation to try and transform the society. That brings with it a whole raft of responsibilities in business that most countries don't have to deal with. We don't just have to bring people up an educational path and teach them about the craft of the business. We have to help them develop the self-esteem that was completely wiped out by apartheid. So that, I think, requires a certain kind of a leadership and sensitivity, and at the same time, I think, a moral and a financial commitment. We see, as I speak to you, turmoil in the country around education and tertiary education, and I think that that's absolutely appropriate, and I think that the students have got every right to wave the flag or wave the banner. I'm convinced that trying to develop people at a tertiary level is part of the solution to our country. And if we think about it, those students that are already in university are not that far away from becoming really productive, educated workers in the workplace. So that's not a 20-year problem. If we could get all of those students that are on the street today through their tertiary degree in the next 3 or 4 years, we've got a whole new workforce ready for us to use. So I think it's a critically important thing. I think we're at a seminal point in our history, and we have to pay attention to that. I think much of the onus falls on the government, because essentially we've doubled the student population over the last few years with very little increase in the subsidies from the government, and therefore the subsidy per student has fallen. We can't say that should necessarily all be replaced by the private sector, because most companies invest a huge amount of money in developing people. Our bill this year will be well over 300 million rand going into educating people. We produce 1,000 apprentices a year out of our company. So that happens. At the middle levels, it happens as well, and at the top level. So companies are investing. The private sector is investing. I think one of the gaps in the education system today in South Africa is that we do not have an alumni group that donates to its universities. And that's because we still have people coming through our universities who are not established in their own right, and therefore aren't in a position to give away money to the university. But with the international universities I'm involved with, I know that the monies that come from alumni are considerable. So a difficult time right now. Education is our biggest single problem, and we ignore what's happening today at our peril. The business environment today is difficult in South Africa. We've got a relatively slow growth, and we've got an employment problem. So it's always possible in any environment for any small business to start up, to find a niche and to grow. But for large businesses to grow further in South Africa becomes a challenge. As one starts to, the larger one is, as a company, the more one's performance will approximate the GDP of the country. And so when growth is slow, it's difficult to grow. And I think more and more businesses on that basis are looking to Africa. South Africans are generally comfortable in Africa. We grow our businesses well. We've grown a 10.5 billion rand business in the last 4 years in Africa, and beyond those borders. And so our company, for example, is operating in Europe as well. I think it's important for me to stress that we are not running away from South Africa. We are saying that we've got such big market shares in our two major areas of business, which is motor vehicles and logistics, that it would be hard to grow those market shares in a slow growth economy. The concept of work-life balance is an intriguing one, because I don't know anyone who's been even moderately successful that has not worked the 18-hour day, and sometimes that goes on for a few weeks, sometimes maybe even months. But it's not sustainable. And so you say you have to get to the point where you say, what determines how I apply my energies, and what do I walk away from, and what do I do? I think that the key to that, or the answer to that question, lies in how you define yourself. And so if you define yourself as a spouse, then when it's time to do the things that a spouse is expected to do, you better turn up. If you define yourself as a father, then when it's time to do the things that a father has to do, you'd better turn up. You can't just say, I can't say to my son, David, I've got an hour, let's have an hour of quality time. It doesn't work like that. And so I think that the notion of work-life balance is about how one defines oneself, what are one's priorities, and really say, if I'm a golfer, that means to play decent golf, I've got to golf. I'm not a golfer, but I happen to have decided to fly a helicopter when I was 55 years old. And at that stage, I had to say, there's no such thing as a part-time, safe helicopter pilot. And therefore, having defined myself as a helicopter pilot, I had to fly helicopters frequently. So one allocates time on the basis of how you define yourself. And for me, the notion of being a spouse has a spiritual dimension to it, obviously a physical and an emotional dimension to it. And that's something I've chosen to devote as much time as I had to keep the relationship alive and well. I know that there's many times I pushed the limits, and Annette would like to have seen me more, and I would like to have been with her more. But I think over time, it's worked. And I happen to think that people talk about give and take in a relationship. I think that's true, but I think the give and take happens over long periods of time. I think that for periods of years, one partner will give, and then the pendulum swings, and the other one gives. And I think if you work on that basis, you do have a basis for a sustainable relationship.
Mark Lamberti. Okay, talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.